What's up, my guys and geeks? Wow, between a potential collab with Stranger Things, one of the best action scenes of the entire show, and the potential return of Moff Gideon, Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3 gave us a ton to talk about. But was it good stuff or bad stuff? Well, today we discuss. Before I go ahead and give you my thoughts on Season 3, Episode 3, be sure to let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this episode. My opinion isn't the right opinion, it's just my opinion. And if you want to see more of these weekly breakdowns of The Mandalorian or other shows, also be sure to put that in the comments down below. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get right into it. This video will follow the same format of a review, a spoiler-free review of the episode, and then a spoiler breakdown at the end. First, the good parts about this episode. I thought this episode did a really excellent job at drawing us, really making us feel what period this is in Star Wars history. With a lot of The Mandalorian taking place revolving around Mandalorian culture, it's easy to forget that this series technically takes place during the beginnings of the New Republic. And this episode brought us back to the New Republic, brought us back to Coruscant, and really focused in on that part of the galaxy.
Coruscant, that doesn't compute.
And I thought that this episode did a really excellent job in highlighting how the New Republic is kind of so focused on the system, on the protocol, on restoring order after the Empire, that they're letting things slip through the cracks, and they're not as focused on the people and the people's motivations as they should be. And so we really get to see a lot of the New Republic, and I think it just provides an interesting, fresh perspective on this universe. We get to see characters we haven't seen in a little while. It's good to catch up with them. I feel like this episode maintains a somewhat slower but very consistent and very reasonable pace, and there's no pace or tonal contrast, except for a bit of a stinger at the end and a bit of a stinger at the end. Much of the entire episode is one consistent tone and consistent pace, which is exactly what I want to see. I don't so much mind what the pace or tone is, as long as it's consistent throughout the episode. And now moving on to the mixed, this is actually one of the episodes of The Mandalorian that, similarly to the way we focused on The Mandalorian for a couple episodes of the first season of the Book of Boba Fett, this episode does not primarily focus on The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is still in this episode. The Mandalorian still has a part to play within this episode, but the primary chunk of the story is centered around a character that we've been introduced to before, but we're focusing on this character and their adventures. So of course we do get to miss some of the interactions we've come to be used to from Mando and Grogu. We get to miss out on seeing the Mandalorian and some of the potential action scenes that could have been involved with that. But ultimately, I still think that it's a positive because I really liked what we got to do and the way we got to interact with this character. And I really enjoyed the fresh perspective and fresh view of the world and some of the potential plot points that this different perspective and this different character were able to bring us. As far as bad things, I honestly don't have anything bad to say about this episode. I understand some people may be upset that we're not focusing on the Mandalorian in this episode, or some people may feel like the slightly slower tone or some of the somewhat awkward acting at some points during this episode may have held it back a bit for them. But I feel like the way they managed to explain everything and tie everything together with the entire episode and the potential for plot points and plot details that this episode created really allowed it to be a spectacular episode. As a matter of fact, I honestly think that even though this didn't focus on The Mandalorian, this has been the best episode of Season 3 so far.
Is that even possible?
So I'm actually going to give this episode a 9.5 out of 10 because honestly, for me, while I would have liked to see more of Mando, the episode works perfectly fine without him in most of it, and it just provides so much potential, and it maintains such a consistent pace and consistent characterization throughout the entire episode that I really appreciated it. But now I'm going to go ahead and give you your spoiler warning, and I'm going to transition into the breakdown part of this video. So if you haven't seen episode 3 of season 3, please go ahead, watch that, and then come back so we can have the fun.
Spoiler alert.
So we start off with the Mandalorian, Bo-Katan, Grogu, and the astromech droid leaving Mandalore after Mando has bathed in the living waters. Mando didn't see the mythosaur when he was down in the living waters last episode, and Bo-Katan chooses not to tell him about that now. She does mention that the cavern is likely deeper and wider due to the Empire's bombing, but she neglects to mention the mythosaur, and I'm interested to see what they'll make of that later in the season. But anyway, then Mando, Grogu, Bo-Katan, and the astromech droid, they all leave Mandalore, and they are attacked by some Imperial fighters.
Gold leader, we have enemy contact. Imperial cruiser and fighters.
And I don't know exactly who these Imperial fighters are working with. I don't know if I missed something in the episode or if we don't learn everything about their affiliation. But Bo-Katan does mention that she's been interfering with and stealing from several operations recently, and that this may be an attack in retribution. And it leads to what I think is one of the best action scenes of the entire series so far, when Mando is forced to jump out of Bo-Katan's plane, take on some of the fighters, get down to the surface of Bo-Katan's planet, capture his ship, and use it to help win the fight.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
And they do eventually escape, but in the process, Bo-Katan's planet, where Mando met her in episode 1, that is bombed and utterly destroyed. And so obviously Bo-Katan is very angry about that. She's very upset, but they're forced to retreat so that they don't end up dying and getting overwhelmed. And so they retreat, they fall back, and that's the last we see of Mando until the very end of the episode. So then we transition into the main body of this episode, and this episode focuses on Dr. Pershing, who was one of the scientists working for Moff Gideon, the one who was responsible for much of the experimentation on Grogu during his time with Moff Gideon. And Pershing has apparently been part of the amnesty program that the New Republic is offering, where they take former Imperial officers and Imperial scientists and Imperial personnel, they recondition them and allow them to work for the New Republic. So we see Pershing give a speech about his ideas and how he's so grateful for this opportunity to work for the New Republic, about how he's motivated by the death of his mother, which could have been prevented by the specific genetic cloning of specific DNA from different hosts, and he explains how his ideas were really corrupted by Gideon and that he merely had good intentions.
Conspiracy, man!
So afterwards, we go and we see Pershing kind of relate with some of the nobility and higher-ups on Coruscant, which is where we spend the majority of this episode. And a lot of this episode is reminiscent of episodes of Andor. It appears to have a lot more of that political focus as opposed to The Mandalorian, but I really actually appreciate that kind of change of pace. So anyway, Pershing gets to the amnesty facility, the amnesty housing, and he runs into several other ex-Imperials who invite him to have a drink with them, including Elia Kane, who was one of the communication officers on Gideon's ship. And so they talk, they get to know each other a little. He mentions that she worked for Moff Gideon, and there's a little bit of a discourse about where Gideon is now. And nobody actually seems to know where Gideon is at this point. And I think it's interesting, if the New Republic had him, as they probably should, they would have paraded him around or spoken more publicly about his capture. But they have done nothing of the sort, evidently, since nobody knows where Gideon is. So either they're holding him in secret for some reason, or he has somehow managed to escape or been captured by some third party. But anyway, Pershing is talking with these other ex-Imperial officers, and he mentions he has a liking for these yellow ration biscuits, and he goes back to his dorm afterwards, and somebody, we later find out it was Kane, delivers him a package of these yellow ration biscuits. But anyway, he's in the Amnesty housing. It's very austere, very Spartan, but reasonably nice. And we see him going to work where he's cataloging data from old Imperial technology and Imperial ships that have been captured. And we see him trying to fit in. And we also learn that his work on cloning has been discontinued as a result of the New Republic's policy against cloning and the kind of technology that he would need to be able to perform his research. So he ends up spending some time bonding with Elia Kane. They go and they see the sights of Coruscant. There's a bit of a funny bit where she tells him to touch like this rock monument, and he reaches out to do so and is stopped by one of the security robots. So we get to see them doing a bit of bonding, but it's very clear there's a note of tension throughout the entire time we see them bonding, because Kane is acting very stiff, and while we can see that Pershing's more introverted and his desire to prove himself to others and prove that he's really redeemed is allowing him to be manipulated by Kane. We can very clearly, as the audience, tell that there's something that's not quite right.
Something's not right here.
But anyway, she winds up talking to him about his research, and she mentions that if it's really to help the New Republic, maybe it's worth breaking the rules a little. And so Pershing continues to think about that, and we see during this episode that every day, and this is what I meant when I said the New Republic seems to be more focused on a protocol and reestablishing order than actually caring about the people, is we see that every day after work, Pershing and presumably all other Amnesty employees are forced to come and have a sit-down session with this kind of counselor robot that asks them questions about whether they're feeling any anger towards the New Republic, any anger towards their co-workers, whether they're adapting to the situation. But really, this robot just fails to have the emotional understanding that a person has. Even during his first session with this robot, before he's really thinking about wanting to continue his experiments and continue working with his technology, it's very clear that he's uncomfortable, but the robot is only designed to get yes or no answers. So as long as he gives those yes or no answers, the robot reports everything as fine. It's not focused on the people and their actual motivations. But anyway, Pershing, he discovers that all his data cataloging efforts are simply to catalog this data before it's destroyed. And it's not going to be destroyed because it's bad information or not useful, but simply because it's Imperial, which really shows another flaw in the New Republic's thinking. They're just getting rid of everything Imperial instead of acknowledging that they can take that technology, take that data, and use it for good. But so anyway, that motivates Pershing, and he finally decides that yes, he wants to continue his research. But when he's talking with the counselor robot, the robot finally, repeatedly, and intensely informs him that this is against the New Republic rules. So Pershing, he goes to Kane, and she has mentioned that she can get him the lab equipment and the facilities necessary to carry on his experimentation. And he goes to her and he says that he wants to go on this mission, even though it's going outside of their secure zone where they're allowed to be, and it's breaking several different New Republic laws.
The trap.
And we see an excellent scene of him in the mirror just examining himself and just repeating to himself that this is for the greater good and for the benefit of the New Republic. We can see that really his thinking is, as long as I'm working genuinely to help the New Republic, to help the people around me, it's okay. Even though I don't like it, it's okay that I break some of these laws, because my ultimate goal, and they'll see this when I'm through with my experimentation, my ultimate goal is to help people. But of course, Kane is still acting very untrustworthy for us, the audience, to see. So we know that his optimism really can't last. So they wind up going to the Imperial junkyards. They go in disguises. They travel on train, and they get to the Imperial junkyards, and they sneak onto a defunct Star Destroyer. And they go to the lab facilities, and they're having a little bit of a talk. Pershing's talking some about himself. Kane's not really giving us much about her. She's being very tight-lipped. And then we hear some rustling noises, and Pershing gets very nervous, so Kane goes to stand lookout. But as they exit the Star Destroyer, they're surrounded by New Republic forces, and they only seem to want to arrest Pershing, which is when Kane reveals that she has betrayed him and actually informed the New Republic about his activities. But she's lied. She's characterized it so as to seem that he's maliciously trying to still work on these experiments for evil instead of actually trying to help and benefit the New Republic.
Why do you lie?
So Pershing is taken away, and then he wakes up on an operating table with a Mon Calamari technician attending to him. And this is where we get a funny reference. He says that he's in a mind flayer machine, which evidently, as he's talking about it, is some piece of old Imperial technology with very, very negative uses by the Empire. But of course, it's a bit funny, and it's a bit interesting because the mind flayer is also one of the main villains in Stranger Things.
The Mind Flayer's back.
So I don't really necessarily think the two things are connected, even though I could probably make a theory video talking about how Stranger Things technically could be in the universe of Star Wars, and technically it could just be that we've never gone to Earth, and Stranger Things could be taking place on Earth within this wider galaxy, and that's why the Upside Down exists, because it's all part of this bigger galaxy. But I don't necessarily think that's the case, although it would absolutely be an interesting scenario. But anyway, the Mon Calamari informs Pershing that they've done research, and if it's at a minor setting, it'll simply wipe him of his evil intentions. And Pershing keeps trying to tell this Mon Calamari that it was a trap, that Kane set him up, that she framed him, that he actually just wants to help. But Kane has already completely convinced everybody around them that she's right and that Pershing was trying to do something bad. So they activate the machine, and at first it doesn't really seem to be doing anything negative. It's just like peacefully reprogramming him, which, don't get me wrong, is still absolutely oppressive and a horrible thing. But at first, at least, they're not hurting him. They're just trying to clear his mind of their perceived evil intentions.
He's wrong! You're wrong!
But then Kane is talking with the Mon Calamari technician, and she's still acting like he's her friend and like she has some sort of interest in seeing that he's safe and protected, and just wants to watch over the operation, even if the Mon Calamari is going to leave, just so she can make sure that her friend is okay. But of course, as soon as the Mon Calamari technician leaves the room, she turns the dial all the way up to the max power setting, and Pershing, like, red lights start glowing on his face, and black veins start crawling all up his face. It's really horrible to watch. Obviously, she's reaching the terrible extent to which this machine was used by the Empire. And we don't know what happens to Pershing. That's where this scene ends, with Kane just watching him go through torture while she eats one of those ration biscuits from earlier in the episode. So we don't really know what happens to Pershing yet, but personally, I think it's going to be something like a complete mind wipe, and he's going to be left completely devoid of memories. And I don't really know where that plot's going to go in the future, Certainly, it appears at this moment, at least the most popular theory, is that Kane is acting on the behalf of Moff Gideon somewhere, that he's either in New Republic custody being held by somebody else or is free on his own, and that Kane is trying to funnel information or somehow use her position inside the New Republic to help benefit Moff Gideon. It's also certainly possible that she's just out for revenge. Pershing snitched on Gideon and now she wants to get back at him, but we won't really know how that develops until later on in the season. But that ends the main body of this episode, and we then transition back to Mando and Bo-Katan and Grogu as they arrive on the planet and meet the Mandalorian's cult. And when they arrive, one of the warriors comes out and greets them as apostates and tells them that they're not welcome there and that they have no right to be there. And Mando tells them that he's bathed in the living waters, and at first they don't believe him, but he produces the proof and Bo-Katan acts as a witness. And they take the proof, which is a vial of living water that Mando gathered, to the armor, and she tests it and says that he has indeed bathed in the living waters, and says he is restored to their clan. And then she also turns to Bo-Katan and tells her that she is entered into the clan, because as Bo-Katan admits, she bathed in the living waters, and she has not removed her helmet since then. So, technically, she is at this time eligible to be part of the Mandalorian clan. So she's told that she can stay there and live that life for however long she wants, and she's free to go whenever she wants. And if she chooses to remove her helmet or anything like that, she'll have to rebathe in the living waters before she can rejoin the cult, of course. But that for the time being, she is perfectly welcomed into the Mandalorian's cult.
That's unexpected.
So I think it's interesting, certainly a lot of potential. I'm fascinated by the idea of Bo-Katan, even for any small period of time, just living under the way and trying to practice Mando's strict religion, especially with the new wave of cynicism she's experienced since her people left her. But I am so excited to see what they do with these plot lines in the future, if they're actually going to have Gideon return to learn more about this Mind Flayer technology and what it actually did to Pershing. I loved getting to see more of Coruscant and the New Republic in this episode, and overall I thought this was an absolutely amazing episode, and I can't wait to see what's next. Go ahead and let me know what you thought of this episode down in the comments below. If you want to see more weekly updates about The Mandalorian, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you can see the next time we upload here at Geek Space. And until then, keep watching The Mandalorian, and see you later. Also, if you want to watch my episode 2 review of The Mandalorian, you can click on this side of the screen. And if you want to see me rank the top 20 Harry Potter characters, you can click on this side of the screen. But you only got 3 seconds because the video's about to end. 2, 1...